This is Cities on a Collision Course, what happens at the intersection of technology, design, construction and community. In this session we explore three fascinating case studies that occur at the collision of technology, design, construction and community. Let's kick things off with creating healthy and active communities sustainably. Our presenter here is David Uhlmann, a registered landscape architect and urban designer. David is the director of the Environment and Sustainability team at Wolter Consulting Group, where he draws on over 18 years' experience in developing sustainable buildings and communities. He's also the founder of the not-for-profit group YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard, which advocates for well-designed, sustainable and innovative development outcomes that provide a community dividend. Please welcome David to the stage, ladies and gentlemen.
I reach out to you tonight. With heart on fire.
Well, thank you for coming along today. When I was asked to do a case study on this topic, I thought of many potential items in terms of sustainable development, buildings, communities, and where we're heading in the industry. But I have a confession to make. I don't actually have a specific case study for you today. It's not because the kids trashed my laptop or the dog ate the USB or anything like that. I just simply couldn't find an adequate case study to tell the story that I wanted to tell today. Not in Australia, and arguably not even in the rest of the world. When I realised that, I considered changing the topic and talking about something else that I could present nice, pretty pictures on. But isn't that what we're here for today? To change things up, to talk about new ideas, innovation, challenging conventions. So I decided to turn my missing case study into a challenge to everybody in this room and to the wider industry. So, now that hopefully I've got you a little bit intrigued, I'll tell you about that challenge later. Before I tackle that, I want to briefly talk about good development and the work we've been doing through YIMBY Queensland. At Wolter Consulting, we've embarked on a journey towards design-led planning that's embedding design thinking into all of our disciplines. Our journey ramped up 3 years ago when we decided to catalyse bringing YIMBY to Australia. Through our work, we've been aiming to counter the negative perceptions that are often presented in the community and in the media on what the development is and what it delivers for us in our cities. So we had to define what good development was. We did that through 4 pillars of what we define good development: community dividend, sustainability, innovation, and of course, design merit. So what are some good examples? On the topic of healthy and active communities, it's been pleasing to see a lot of talk, both at this conference and generally in the community and in the industry, on healthy and active suburbs, promoting the health and well-being benefits of living within walking distance of a park, from urban greening, from having connected off-road cycle networks. All those things are really getting much more traction now, and they're a necessary element of healthy and livable communities. Indeed, many of our new communities are already doing this, not necessarily because they're the right thing to do, because they sell. It's the point of difference for some of these bigger communities, particularly in a slower market. So by our own YIMBY definition, though, does it meet all those 4 pillars? Do they deliver on the sustainability and innovation pillars as well? So let's go a little bit deeper into those. Now, I originally had a nice big flashing buzzword warning sign here about sustainability because it's been around for so long, but I thought I'd take that out because I didn't want to give anyone a migraine. The concept of sustainability has been around for so long and talked about for so many years that it means different things to different people. But it's got to the point now where organisations around the world are declaring climate emergencies, biodiversity loss emergencies and the like. It's that second part that I want to have a bit more discussion on today, the biodiversity. It's got a little bit less attention to some of the fraught politics around climate change, possibly because the numbers are less easy to deny. So what is we as an industry doing about biodiversity loss? Is it possible for us to not only stop causing damage, but to also start to repair the damage we have done? Can we be biodiversity positive? Various industry organisations are addressing this right now. Green Building Council, for example, has recently put biodiversity as a central plank of the next version of the Green Star rating tools. Not just in communities, but in buildings as well. Enhancing biodiversity is the next evolution of sustainable buildings and sustainable communities. And we, as an industry, need to be prepared for that and also see the great opportunities that can come from that. But just quickly on where we are now. Green buildings have been around for decades. But they focus primarily on the built items, on electricity, on power use, on water use, on minimising those aspects. All great outcomes, but they're fast becoming mainstream. The continuing strengthening of building codes mean they're heading towards building business as usual. Rating tools like Green Star and others have also had some success in driving change, particularly in buildings and to a lesser extent in communities. In the case of residential communities though, they have mostly been focused on what the developer can control. Items within the public realm, urban design, precinct scale initiatives. But what about the houses themselves? Is this the last great frontier of sustainability? In the case of residential communities, though fantastic work is being done on that public realm, developers seeking certification under these schemes have been largely powerless to change, arguably the most important part, which is all the houses that get built in those estates. The residential buildings, because they are effectively locked into standard project home designs delivered by project builders, the question has to be asked, is there any point having a sustainable community if all the houses that are built in it are off-the-shelf, minimum standard project homes? Is that truly sustainable? So, are there actually housing examples out there? Yes, there are. There are lots of them. Various organisations have tried to show that you can do housing sustainably. But for the most part, they've been demonstration or one-off bespoke designs, not off-the-shelf models. And there are industry leaders in this category as well. And some quick examples include like Mervac's House with No Bills project from a couple of years ago, which set out to really show how a sustainable home could basically save you money. There was Fraser's Property and Linter Energy, who delivered the Fairwater project in Sydney, which incorporated geothermal heating and cooling instead of standard air conditioning. Lendlease's sustainable home at Yarrabilba. This sought to show that a home could be both sustainable and affordable. Most of our development agencies are also taking leadership in this space, trying to demonstrate how to apply sustainability principles to housing and higher density residential. In Victoria, Sustainability Victoria last year launched a carbon neutral homes pilot with the assistance of Stockland, Metricon and SJD Homes, with the goal of eventually delivering a sustainable project home. In South Australia, Renewal SA mandated sustainability initiatives in their Bowden development, a key driver towards Australia's first Green Star certified townhouse project through Rivergum Homes. Right now in Queensland, I'm currently managing the Green Star Community submission for EDQ's development at Castledine, which will be their first Green Star community. And credit to EDQ for heading down that track as well. There are also alternate models as well with regards to Nightingale Housing in Melbourne, for example, which sought to do a sustainable home with various innovative initiatives. So what can be done? Why are we not doing it? There's lots of barriers that we can talk about here, but I think probably the biggest one is we're talking about how we deal with development. Just as a quick example, we now have a situation in BCC where both major parties are effectively banning any kind of missing middle housing in 75% of the city. It's easy to blame the pollies, but to a certain extent is part of what we as an industry have been delivering that has caused these backlashes. So it's the minimum yield, the yield-driven, the cost-driven projects that have caused some of that backlash. And that has also translated into barriers for sustainable homes as well. It's the business as usual model. Why should we change? Thing is, the pollies and the community are telling us we have to change. And if we don't, they're going to change it for us through regulation, through protest. So that's where we're at. So, can we change? What else can we do? The easiest way is to start doing some things that we can control, or some smaller bite-sized chunks. So I want to talk about biodiversity again. Let's quickly start with planning codes. I heard a shudder through the room then when we start talking about planning codes. They talk about things like form and roof lines and housing, but for the most part, they're largely silent on sustainability initiatives. What type of development do our planning codes lead to? Sea of roofs, nothing really green, heat island effect, this type of project. These are the type of outcomes that get communities upset. So how do we fix them? Incentivisation is obviously the key. If you turn up with a Green Star community, you should get reduced infrastructure charges, things like those. We have to seriously think about incentivising. What about biodiversity? Can we incentivise that? Can we generally incorporate that into our homes? I think we can. We've just had some fantastic news this morning as well from BCC, who are now telling us that they will not count a green roof as an extra story on high-rise buildings, which is awesome work, and it's a credit to Natalie and the INBI team who've got that lobbied for. But there are many examples that we can do it from every scale, from things like 316 bus stops that were planted in the Netherlands for bee habitat. The now world-famous vertical forest in Milan by Stefano Bori, specifically selected species for biodiversity. And we can do it on individual homes. There's one example in Sydney. So, coming back to my challenge. If we're not doing it, why are we not doing it? We should be continually questioning these codes that are holding us back. The type of case study I was looking for was a small-scale residential, largely standalone, which had green roofs. There just isn't one. Is anyone willing to take up that challenge? If you are, it'll sell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Our next case study is the collision of cost and computational design, a quantity surveyor's perspective. It's the Aussie's job in the world, isn't it, being a quantity surveyor? I don't know, I reckon about 10. That's how it works. Interesting things just happened. Our speaker, Matt, was going to be here. He's sick. We have a new speaker who's just come off the bench. I don't have her resume here, so I'm just going to make it up. Caitlin started her career working at McDonald's. She then went on to be the first Australian to win the female motocross championship. She then developed a very serious poker machine addiction. On the bright side, her book about it, How the Queen of the Nile Ruined My Life, quickly became a bestseller. But she's not here to talk about that, ladies and gentlemen. She's here to talk about reckoning things. The collision of cost and computational design, a quantity surveyor's perspective. Please welcome Caitlin Shield to the stage, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. You were close. I started at Silly Sollies and I did ride motorbikes when I was a teenager, so close. The rest of it, you lost me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caitlin Shields. I'm an associate and a 5D quantity surveyor at Mitchell Brandtman Quantity Surveyors. I am filling in for Matt Hemming, who is unfortunately unwell today. And today we've been invited by the urban developer to talk to you about technology and how that's changing our industry at a really rapid pace, but also we want to take pause and reflect on, let's embrace this technology, let's use it to its best ability, but let's pause and make sure we're going through thorough process and thorough design, and the thorough process of development. So, let's get into it. We're in a shifting market. Markets go in waves and troughs, and at the moment, there's a lot of disruption in our industry. Again, like David, we've got buzzwords, brace yourself, and there's a lot of disruption in our industry. And it changes the way projects are delivered. So Mitchell Brandtman are really passionate about BIM, that's building information modeling, for those that aren't aware, 3D modeling, where software is really leading the way in how we design our buildings and how we shape our developments. And it's really practicing the development on screen, on the computer, before you even get out to site, which is really, really cool for a number of ways, and I'll go into that shortly. But we need to take pause, as I said. So if we look at the traditional development process, we start at concept and feasibility, and that's where you use your rule of thumb. What's the project I did last time? What's my neighbour doing it for? Let's read some cost guides. Then we actually get into design and we form a brief off of what works in a feasibility model. So preliminary design leads to developed design and locking in DA. Then we work through the tender and documentation, going through really detailed development design, working through construction, and then obviously that 80% of OPEX in the operation of the building. When we look at how we're doing things right now with the adoption of technology, this first few phases are really rushed at the moment. We're in a rush to get out to market. We're in a rush to sign the contract and get out on site. You're paying land tax, you're paying financial interest fees. So it's in everyone's best interest to start the development as soon as possible. So as I said, we work off a theoretical budget. You might know some square metre rates. Everyone loves 1,600 a square metre. We work off cost guides, may call up a friendly QS that might give you a rate per square metre, and then you run your feasibility. Then you get to the point of developed design, and maybe you say, let's just check in with cost before we take it out to market. Let's get some real costs attached to these developed designs. And that's when the problem lies, is what was theoretical right at the start doesn't quite match what the actual cost may be. So we've got this kind of grey area of saying, what's happened to our design, where have we gone wrong, what's inefficient in the building? So cue the value engineering workshops. And as quantity surveyors, we're really pleased to see that value engineering is coming back into the fore. We're seeing more and more of them on developments, because that's something that should be at least reflected on your development, is you form a brief, you get a design, and don't just run with it. Take pause, reflect on the development, and let's see what value we can add into it. The things that David mentioned, let's make sure we've considered those and can we afford them in the development? Does it stack up? However, most of the time we get into value engineering workshops because there's a budget problem, and now we're just talking about cost savings. And then more often than not, it's actually, by the time we get to that point, all we're really left to touch is the finishes. And again, as quantity surveyors, it's actually really upsetting to see something that's been designed, people put a real intention and a vision towards a building, and all that's left for us to touch is the finishes on a job, because we can't touch structure, we can't touch layout, that's already locked in. And so now we start to work on the finishes. Can we bring that rate per square metre back on the PC rate of tiles? Can we look at reducing the landscaping budget, which is not a great outcome when you think of everything that David just spoke us through? So it's really this point here that we're locked down. And that's actually, we've run the numbers because as quantity surveyors, we're numbers people, we like to do the stats. And it's actually 70% of the cost cannot be touched by the time we get to our value engineering processes. And that leaves just the 30%. And that 30% in terms of value, everything's of value in these developments, 30% of what holds the most value is the only thing left for us to touch in terms of what we suggest in a value engineering workshop. So how do we capture that sweet spot? That point in between where you can add the most value, get the most efficiency out of your building before we lock it down and before we have to attack those finishes, which we don't want to do. Over the last 24 hours, it's been really inspiring to see the developers and the designers up here on stage that have shown us projects that are about the brand or the vision or the look and feel. That's something that we don't really want to touch at all. It's about efficiency. Right, so now we get to the cool tech stuff. What we can do, because as in our office we see a range of projects. We're not doing one a year, we're not doing 3 a year. Through our office in Brisbane alone, we're seeing over 200 projects in our office at one point in time. And again, as numbers people, we capture that data, we analyze that data, and we start to benchmark that data. So now we look at that where we're lining up like projects. We're not just saying, well, it was $1,600 a square metre on the last project, so it might be that for the next one. Let's actually line up a few of comparable developments. Let's see what those real numbers work out at. And then let's overlay that with the cool tech stuff. So the power of technology and how we are shifting in our industry at the moment is going so rapidly, and it's hard to get a capture on, but this is some cool graphics of what we're doing. Is actually starting to conceptualize, mass up developments, and also running the benchmark data as well. So we're not just getting a design and saying, here's what we are going to build, can you tell us how much it is? We're getting a brief and saying, we want to build this development, what's the potential of it, what's the yield, what's the maximum capacity we can get out of this for the best value, because that's what we're all here for, is value for the end user and value for everyone along the way. So we start to run through a few different software programs, but ultimately we're massing up projects. We're starting to work out the scale of the building, the size of the building, what triggers code compliance issues once we go over a certain level, and we run the numbers in between as well. And it's all hooked up, it's all parametric, and we're running those numbers over and over again so we can actually provide a better outcome for the client. And we do that by way of analyzing the project. We run one scenario, we benchmark it. We run another scenario, we benchmark it. And as I said, this is actually like a reverse brief in terms of giving the client back, here's what your intent of the development is, how can we enhance it, how can we make it better? How can we touch that 70% of cost that's going to add value before we really have to touch the back end of the job, which we don't want to do. Don't have much time, so I'm just going to show some more graphics. But ultimately, what are we doing? We're running design scenarios, we're running the benchmark data, and that's all before DA as well. So that's the important thing. When you look at that development design and we work through the preliminary design phase, before we even get into detail, let's run it over and over again. Let's make sure common areas are the most efficient area they can be. Let's make sure basements are in the most logical place they can be, and as efficient as they can be. You think that's an easy equation, but we do see some car parks that aren't that great. Due to site restrictions, due to site constraints, but sometimes also just because people haven't thought about it in a different scenario. And that's what we're starting to run with now over and over again. This is all for the intent of value of everyone in the project. I'm not going to read that list out because that will take over the minute that I have left. And I'll leave you with that, and you can ask me any questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and well done. What a great presentation for someone who just literally came up the bench. I don't think Matt should ever present for your company ever again.
I disagree.
Is he your boss?
He is, yes.
See, that's what's happened, isn't it? I'll do the talk, love. I'll be fine. You're fantastic at it. More of it, please. Next up, the collision of conservation, a 21st century approach to heritage redevelopment. Presenting this, it's Ruth Wilson. She's had 25 years of experience in Australia and Europe. The overriding theme in all of Ruth's work is the focus on the human experience of people using the buildings and her belief that through good design, we have the opportunity to enhance and improve people's lives. Couldn't be a truer thing spoken. She's the principal studio leader at the Melbourne firm Architectus. Please welcome Ruth to the stage.
Thank you. So I'm talking about where the past and the future collide in our cities. And to do that, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of the State Library Victoria redevelopment to show you how our approach to conservation is securing the State Library as the beating heart of Melbourne for many generations to come. And I'll conclude, perhaps more philosophically, by talking about some lessons the State Library can teach us about designing for the future. The $88.1 million Vision 2020 project is all about unlocking possibilities. It releases 40% more space to the public and increases seating by 70%. But more than that, it unlocks the full potential of the library to reach more Victorians in more ways. The State Library already welcomes 2 million people through its doors every year. It's the 4th busiest library in the world. These images are of the first phase of the redevelopment that was opened late last year. And these are typical scenes through the library. People reading, working on laptops, meeting friends, discussing, problem solving, accessing the library's collection for research or for pure enjoyment. Vision 2020 allows the library to do what it does even better, to reach out and engage with an increasingly diverse community, a community of all ages that includes researchers, students, families, young and lifelong learners, culture creators and culture seekers, city dwellers and regional Victorians. So Architectus began this redevelopment in 2016, and we partnered with the Danish-based firm Schmidt Hammerlassen, with whom we've just completed Taronga, which is the Christchurch City Library. Melbourne-based Andronis conservation architects advised on all the heritage aspects of the project, and the wider team includes Irwin Consult for Structure and Services, Stenson Varming for lighting, Arup for AV and acoustics, and the whole thing's project managed by Development Victoria. We're about 6 weeks off opening, and the head contractor built it, just doing the finishing touches. So many people talk about going to the library to get into the zone, and by that they mean the zone of focus and the zone of productive endeavour. So I need to get one thing straight. The dome, the beautiful domed reading room, is not part of the redevelopment. That was beautifully restored in the 90s and will remain exactly as it is. It helps to understand that the library, which takes up a full city block in Melbourne, is actually 23 buildings, built between 1856 and 2003. Our design approach is to strip back the many years of clutter that have been added to the buildings and reveal whole spaces in their intended beauty, and allow the various buildings to be true to their era. Then through this fabric, we weave what we call the design line. These are interventions and elements that achieve the 21st century functionality, and they work together to create a cohesive and legible journey through the different parts of the library. So this shows the scope on the ground floor in blue. We touch about 70% of the ground floor of the library. The jewel in the crown of the redevelopment is the Ian Potter Queen's Hall. The central portion of this beautiful hall was actually the first part of the library. It was opened in 1856 in the middle of the Victorian gold rush. And in this era, libraries were elite. They were associated with monasteries, private mansions, private clubs and universities. Most everyday people had never set foot inside a library. So to have Redmond Barry devise a free library as the cornerstone of the new city of Melbourne really spoke of his ambition for us to be a knowledge-based, forward-thinking and egalitarian society. This is a photo from the opening, flooded with natural light from the curved roof lights. Queen's Hall has been a reading room, it's housed collections, displayed art. It was a Museum Victoria for 57 years, and the Art, Music and Performing Arts Library for 28 years. It's been closed for 16 years. And this was the hall shortly after Built took possession with the beautiful 1973 colour scheme. You can see the fish scale glazing in the curved roof lights is completely opaque, so it was covered up in the 1960s due to waterproofing issues. I'm going to show you how we worked with the hall. We started off by doing a laser scan of it, so a point cloud scan. So every dot on this image is actually a geolocated point in space. And from this, we were able to start building our Revit model. And we added more and more detail until we basically had a twin of the space as a digital model. And what this helped us do was solve some really tricky things. So the space had never been heated or cooled, so that was a key driver. We also wanted to let the natural light back in. So this image shows the point cloud on one side kind of blending into our digital model on the other. And you can see the space between the old roof and a new translucent roof is actually where all the new plant is. So we've been able to heat and cool the space without seeing any ductwork. Now this photo, believe it or not, is one of the most important in the project for Architectus. It was taken before we even won the job on a site visit. It's a tiny section of wall that has had layers of paint scraped back to reveal the first decorative paint scheme of the hall, which was created by Edward Latrobe Bateman. We love the sense of reveal, the sense that we were seeing something real and so old. So we developed a conservation concept of revealing, not replicating. Andronis and the library were equally excited to go down this path, and the approach was supported by Heritage Victoria. So to me, it makes complete sense that our state's reference library shows the original. It reveals the primary source, not a replication or a reproduction. So the big public opening is only 6 weeks away, and I can tell you the final result is much better than this render. The Eden Potter Queen's Hall will be a reading room by day, flooded with natural light, fully accessible for all, with a neutral palette that makes those paint scrapes the real heroes. And at night, it's an event space for gala dinners, cocktail parties, weddings, book launches, fashion shows. It will reinstate itself as one of Melbourne's most remarkable rooms. Let's have a look at some of the other spaces. The Victoria Gallery, new International Museum standard exhibition space created through the generous bequest of the John and Miriam Wiley Foundation. This is the quad, which is actually the space under the dome. So there's a huge amount of consultation we did with the various stakeholders, and we found out some interesting things. So this space, for example, is really popular for tutoring. So it's a neutral, safe territory where high school students can come in and meet their tutors, who are often university students. And we also found out for the under 18s, it's kind of a good first date. Like, you're not really going on a first date, you're going to study at the State Library. So these activities and many, many more will find their home here. And that space leads on to 4 quarters. This one's called the Ideas Quarter. It has a start space, which will support startups and entrepreneurs, with a mezzanine space, which is subscription-based. And Christian is the lead donor establishing this space. This was the consultation we did with the children and their families. So the new Pauline Gandel Children's Quarter was basically co-designed with those people coming to partake in the library's Baby Bounce and Storytime programs, and this was the River of Dreams they created with us. These programs are incredibly popular and have also become a forum for parents with English as a second language to practice their skills. This one was our favourite, so summed up the intent of many of the children. So places to climb up, in and around, places to hide, to discover, to read, to make things and play. So this is the castle, or it could be a tree house, or it could be an eco spaceship. The ground floor is designed for babies to 7-year-olds, and the upper floor is designed for the older kids, because we got the clear message that they wanted nothing to do with the little kids. So now, the Conversation Quarter, endowed by the Hanson Little Foundation, so that it'll hold workshops, lectures, conferences and meetings. And now we're going back to the spaces that opened last year, and I'm asking what the State Library Victoria can teach us about designing for the future. What is it about these spaces that has kept them so popular and so useful over the span of 3 centuries? We think the answers are fairly simple. These are spaces built with ambition. They have what we call good bones, which means they're light-filled and spacious, with good floor-to-floor heights and large column spans, and that makes them endlessly adaptable. They're tactile and friendly, and ultimately these are uplifting spaces. So concluding with a great quote here from Winston Churchill, and we've looked in both directions in Vision 2020, back to reveal and conserve the beauty of this remarkable space, and forward to make sure it continues to support the remarkable work of our State Library Victoria and continues to have a place in the hearts and minds of all Victorians. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you, Ruth. I might just start with you. I love that the idea we go back in time at the start of the library and its reason for being a wonderful one, this egalitarian ideal, and that I loved how you unpacked also why it's still so popular. We've had this huge explosion, aren't we, of the resurgence in libraries. Do you think we're building with the same purpose and conviction today?
Often, not always, I think. I think there is a lot of ambition in our cities. I think we can be proud of what we're doing. But there are pockets which, have less quality and perhaps less ambition. So I'd like to think that every project in some respect has an ambition, whether it's, putting a green roof on something that's quite ubiquitous. Pushing the boundary a little bit.
But we certainly see if you do build with conviction, hundreds of years later, the things they still move us in different ways. What a beautiful project. David, let's talk about trees for a second.
I like trees.
Do you ever like trees? Well, this is the interesting thing. Lots of people don't, bizarrely enough. And we've got, certainly in Western Sydney, we've got this terrible problem with a lack of canopy because people won't plant trees in their own backyard because they hate leaves. So everyone's driving, we all know this thing, it's going to be 45 degrees in Western Sydney, there's no shade. How do we get people to fall in love with trees?
There's been an awful lot of research done recently about how being in touch with nature makes you healthier. And just looking at the many examples, if you go to a park, I saw a stat recently, or it might have even been yesterday, that people who are in the park doing social media from a park, it's all positive. So it's about that positive mindset and what it can deliver. And so we need to really get that connection back. There's also a lot of talk about biophilic design, and what that means is the sense of well-being that we get when we're in touch with nature. So it's that connection that's been lost. And you touched on the fact about people not wanting to do it in their own backyards, they don't want the maintenance. And to a certain extent that's happening anyway because our lots are getting smaller. They just want this low-maintenance bit of courtyard in the back, and that's about it. That's fine, but we've got to counterbalance that with our public open space as well. So if we're delivering developments like that, we need those open spaces that people can go to and be in touch with nature. So hopefully, if we develop enough of these, they don't need to be huge parks. They can be small-scale pocket parks. And that's, again, when I was touching on the codes, a lot of the codes these days don't even allow little parks anymore. They just talk about big 1-hectare super parks. They're a lot easier to deliver on the smaller scale as well, and easier for people to walk to. If they're easier for people to walk to, they will walk to them and get back in touch with nature. And I think that's a big focus. Certainly what we're trying to do is really giving people that opportunity.
Almost every render that you ever see of a new building now has a green wall on it, and there's certain places where it works really well. I've seen some for Adelaide where there's no way that they can keep those things working in Adelaide. The climate's not right.
Yep.
In Sydney, the famous one, the rats run up and all that stuff.
Yep.
Why don't we just plant trees out the front of buildings instead?
Yes, we can do that as well. But again, we're just so spatially challenged in what we're doing, particularly in intercity areas. And there is opportunity to use those spaces. And they can be done well. And the research is getting better, the examples are getting better, the technology is catching up as well. So once we get that, those issues start to go away. So I think it's just making sure we've got those test cases being trialled as well to make sure we can identify those opportunities and to show people that they can work. And they're happening all around the world. So in Europe, for example, green roofs are mandated on certain building types. In Germany, for example, every public building has to have a green roof. There's no argument. It has to be there. So the technology is there. We've been doing it for a very long time. We've got a little way to catch up with in this country, but there is plenty of examples where we can look to.
Should we all be growing marijuana for that reason?
Well, as long as it insulates the roof, why not?
There you go. Great idea. Thank you. I've got time for one last question. Caitlin, how much were you spending on the poker machines?
Only a little.
No, thanks. Actually, no, serious question. Will a computer in your industry ever replace someone saying, let's just get the cheapest shit taps from Bunnings?
Maybe.
Okay. We are going to lunch, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Please thank our 3 wonderful speakers.